At just 22 years old, Emma Carter had no family left. No parents, no home, no one waiting for her. After years of feeling forgotten by the world, she spent her last $11,000 on an abandoned island cottage that nobody wanted. The house had been empty for decades. The island was isolated, and locals warned her to stay away. But what Emma didn't know was that hidden inside that crumbling cottage was a secret buried for 70 years. A secret connected to a missing girl, a forgotten family, and a mystery that would change her life forever. If stories like this touch your heart, be sure to subscribe. Now, let's discover what Emma found inside that house. They called it Blackthorn Island, a lonely stretch of rocky shoreline off the coast of Oregon, where fog drifted between the pine trees like wandering ghosts, and the ocean seemed to swallow every sound before it could travel too far. Only one ferry stopped there each week. No grocery store, no tourists, no reason for anyone to stay, but that was exactly why Emma Carter chose it. At 22 years old, she had already attended more funerals than birthdays. Her father died in a logging accident when she was 8. Her mother followed 2 years later after a long illness that drained every dollar and every ounce of hope they had left. After that came foster homes, different last names, different bedrooms, different people promising they cared, and eventually leaving. By the time Emma reached adulthood, she had learned something painful. If you expected someone to stay, you were usually disappointed. Then came Evelyn, a retired school teacher who took Emma in during her final years of high school. She wasn't rich. She wasn't related. But she was the closest thing Emma had ever known to family. And when Evelyn passed away that winter, the silence she left behind felt unbearable. For months, Emma drifted through life, working double shifts, sleeping too little, talking to almost no one. She wasn't looking for a fresh start. She wasn't searching for adventure. She just wanted somewhere the memories couldn't follow her quite so loudly. That's when she found the listing. Abandoned island cottage, structural damage, cash only, sold as is. The photos showed a weather-beaten house perched on a cliff above the sea. Broken windows, a sagging roof, paint peeling away in long, forgotten strips. Most people would have seen a disaster. Emma saw something else. A place nobody wanted. A place that understood what it meant to be left behind. The asking price was $11,000. Everything Evelyn had left her. Every last cent. She bought it without ever seeing it in person. The locals in the harbor town thought she was crazy. That house has been empty for decades, one fisherman told her. Storms tear through there every winter. Another shook his head. Nothing lasts long on Blackthorn. But Emma wasn't looking for something that would last forever. She was looking for somewhere she could finally belong. The ferry ride took nearly 3 hours. As the mainland disappeared into the distance, she stood alone at the railing, clutching a worn duffel bag that contained nearly everything she owned. The wind cut through her coat. The sea churned beneath gray skies. And then she saw it. The cottage, waiting on the highest point of the island. Crooked, weathered, silent, like it had been standing there for generations, watching the world come and go, watching people arrive, watching them leave. Emma stepped off the ferry and onto the dock. For a moment, she simply stood there, listening. The gulls, the waves, the wind moving through the pines. No voices, no traffic, no reminders of everything she had lost. Just, the kind of quiet she'd spent her whole life searching for. What Emma didn't know, what no one could have known, was that the old cottage wasn't waiting for a new owner. It was waiting for her. Because hidden inside its walls was a secret that had remained buried for 70 years. a secret connected to a forgotten girl, a vanished family, and a story that was somehow tied to Emma's own life. She had come to Blackthorn Island hoping to escape the past. Instead, she was about to uncover it. It took Emma nearly 20 minutes just to get the front door open. The key, rusted by decades of sea air, fought against the lock as though the cottage itself had forgotten how to welcome anyone inside. The porch groaned beneath her boots. Wind rattled the broken shutters, and when the door finally swung inward, it wasn't relief she felt. It was something heavier, a stillness, the kind that settles into a place after years of being left alone. Emma stepped inside slowly. The smell hit her first. Salt, dust, old wood swollen by countless winters. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper hanging in long strips from the walls. Cobwebs stretched across corners like forgotten curtains. A cracked grandfather clock leaned against one wall. Frozen at a time no one remembered. She swallowed hard. This was really hers now. Every broken board, every leaking corner, every hidden memory. Setting her duffel bag near the fireplace, she took a slow breath. "I guess it's just us now," she whispered to the empty house. The words sounded strange in the silence, almost as if the cottage had heard them. That first night was miserable. The electricity had long since been disconnected. The temperature dropped sharply after sunset. Emma wrapped herself in 2 blankets and slept on the living room floor beside a lantern she found in a kitchen cabinet. Or at least she tried to sleep. Every creak sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind felt like someone brushing against the walls. Several times she woke suddenly, convinced she had heard another person inside the house. But each time there was only darkness, only silence, only the lonely song of the ocean outside. Still, she stayed. The next morning she got to work. She scrubbed mold from the kitchen counters, removed broken furniture, opened windows that hadn't been touched in years. The labor was exhausting, but strangely comforting. For the first time in months, she had something concrete to focus on. Not grief, not memories, just work. Each evening she kept notes in a small journal. Tiny victories, proof that progress was happening. Day 2 cleared the dining room. Day 4 repaired front porch railing. Day 6 found old dishes still intact. Day 8 cleared attic access hatch. It was that final entry that changed everything. The attic access wasn't obvious. In fact, it had been hidden behind a loose wooden panel in the upstairs hallway. Emma only found it because one of the floorboards shifted beneath her weight. The sound caught her attention. Curious, she began examining the wall nearby. Eventually, her fingers discovered a narrow seam hidden beneath layers of faded paint. When she pulled, a section of paneling swung outward. Behind it stood a narrow staircase disappearing into darkness. Emma stared at it. The cottage had never mentioned an attic in the listing. For several moments she considered walking away. Then curiosity won. Grabbing her flashlight, she climbed. The stairs complained beneath every step. Dust swirled through the beam of light. The air grew colder, thinner. The attic itself was surprisingly large. Boxes sat stacked against the walls. Old blankets covered forgotten furniture. A broken rocking horse rested in one corner, tilted on its side. Nothing unusual. At least not at first. Then Emma noticed a cedar trunk tucked behind several crates. Unlike everything else in the attic, it looked intentionally hidden. Her pulse quickened. Slowly, she moved the crates aside. The trunk wasn't locked. The hinges squealed when she opened it. Inside were dozens of papers, letters tied together with ribbon, old maps, property records, several newspaper clippings, and photographs. Lots of photographs. Emma carefully lifted the first one, then froze. The girl staring back at her looked almost exactly like her. Not merely similar, not a vague resemblance. Identical. The same dark eyes, the same narrow chin, even the same small scar above the eyebrow. Her heart skipped. She flipped the photograph over. No name, no explanation, just a date. A chill ran down her spine. She quickly reached for another photo. Then another. The same girl appeared again and again, standing on the beach, sitting on the porch, smiling beside the cottage. The images looked decades old, yet the face remained unmistakable. Emma's face. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Outside, the wind began to rise. The attic windows rattled softly. Emma continued searching through the trunk. Beneath the photographs, she discovered a bundle of letters. The paper had yellowed with age, but the handwriting remained clear. Elegant. Careful. The letters were signed by a woman named Eleanor Carter. Emma stared at the signature. Carter. Her last name? A coincidence, she told herself. It had to be. Yet her hands trembled as she unfolded the first letter. Most of it described life on the island. Storms, ferry schedules, daily routines. Then she found one passage underlined heavily. If anyone ever finds these letters, please know that the truth was never buried willingly. We were forced into silence. We were told that forgetting was safer than remembering. Emma felt her stomach tighten. She reached for another letter, and another. The deeper she read, the stranger the story became. References to a missing child, a disappearance that was never reported, people arriving on the island under assumed names, warnings written in the margins, secrets hidden within the cottage itself. Then she found the final envelope. Unlike the others, it had never been opened. Across the front, written in fading ink, were 6 words. For the girl who comes back. Emma's breath caught. The room suddenly felt much smaller, much quieter, almost as if 70 years of waiting had led to this exact moment. To her, she stared at the envelope for a long time before carefully sliding a finger beneath the seal. Whatever was inside, she knew her life would never be the same again. And for the first time since arriving on Blackthorn Island, Emma realized something unsettling. She hadn't discovered the cottage's secrets by accident. Somehow, they had been waiting for her to find them. For several seconds, Emma simply stared at the envelope. The attic had gone completely silent. Even the wind outside seemed to have paused. Her fingers trembled as she turned the envelope over. There was no stamp, no date. Only those 6 words written in faded blue ink. For the girl who comes back. A strange feeling settled in her chest. Not fear. Not exactly. Something deeper. As if she had stepped into a story that had begun long before she was born. Carefully, she broke the brittle seal. Inside was a single folded letter. The paper crackled as she opened it. The handwriting matched the other letters she had found. Elegant. Precise. Patient. Emma lowered herself onto an old trunk and began to read. If you are reading this, then somehow you found your way home. Perhaps you do not know who I am. Perhaps no one ever told you our story. If that is true, then they succeeded in doing exactly what they intended. They erased us. Or at least they tried. My name is Eleanor Carter, and 70 years ago, a child disappeared from this island. The world believed she was dead. She wasn't. Emma stopped reading. Her heartbeat quickened. The surname, the island, the mystery. None of it felt like coincidence anymore. She continued. The girl was hidden, protected. kept away from people who wanted her silence more than her safety. What happened that year destroyed a family, destroyed friendships, destroyed lives. And the truth was buried where no one would think to look. Beneath the house. Emma's eyes widened. Beneath the house. She reread the sentence 3 times. Then once more. The words refused to change. The truth was buried beneath the house. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She flipped through the remaining pages. Most of the letters spoke in fragments. Warnings. Names she didn't recognize. Mentions of fairy records that had vanished. References to a journal that had never been found. But one final paragraph stood out. If you have found this letter, then you must find what lies below. The house remembers. And it has waited long enough. Emma lowered the letter slowly. The attic suddenly felt suffocating. She glanced around the room. The old furniture. The boxes. The dusty rafters. For a moment, she imagined someone standing there decades ago, writing those words by lantern light, waiting, hoping, believing someone would eventually come, someone like her. The thought should have sounded ridiculous. Instead, it felt unsettlingly simple. Outside, thunder rumbled far across the ocean. A storm was approaching. But Emma barely noticed. Her attention remained fixed on one sentence. Beneath the house. The next morning she began searching. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The cottage sat on a stone foundation reinforced by thick wooden beams. Every room looked exactly as she remembered. Old, weathered, ordinary. Yet once the idea lodged itself in her mind, she couldn't stop looking. She tapped floorboards, measured wall thickness, examined every corner. By afternoon, frustration began replacing curiosity. Maybe the letter was symbolic. Maybe Eleanor had been referring to buried memories, family secrets, anything other than a literal hiding place. Then Emma entered the living room, the room where she had spent her first night, the room dominated by the massive stone fireplace. She stopped. Something felt off. The hearth extended farther into the room than seemed necessary. Nearly 3 feet farther. At first glance it appeared normal. But the dimensions didn't make sense. Not with the layout she'd observed from outside. Slowly she knelt beside the fireplace, running her hand across the floorboards. Dust coated her fingertips. Nothing unusual. Then her knuckles struck something hollow. A different sound. A different echo. Emma froze. She tapped again. Hollow. Her pulse quickened. She grabbed a flashlight and examined the floor more carefully. There, near the edge of the hearth, a narrow seam almost invisible beneath decades of dirt. Her breath caught. She found a screwdriver in her toolbox and carefully worked it into the gap. The board resisted, then suddenly lifted. A hidden panel. Emma stumbled backward. For several seconds she simply stared. The opening revealed darkness below. A narrow crawl space disappearing beneath the cottage. Cold air drifted upward. Air that smelled of damp earth and old wood, as if the space had been sealed for generations. The storm outside intensified. Rain began striking the windows. Thunder rolled across Blackthorn Island. Yet Emma couldn't look away. Something down there had waited 70 years. And somehow she knew she was standing exactly where Eleanor intended. She lit a lantern, checked the batteries in her flashlight, then lowered herself through the opening. The crawl space was barely large enough to move through. Dust coated everything. Spider webs stretched between support beams. The silence felt unnatural, heavy, almost watchful. Emma crawled slowly forward. 5 feet, 10 feet, 15. Then the flashlight beam caught something ahead. A shape. A box, half buried beneath the dirt. Her breathing stopped. The box was wooden, wrapped in faded oilcloth, protected from moisture, protected intentionally. Someone had wanted it to survive. Emma brushed away the dirt. The lid bore a carved symbol, a small bird, its wings spread wide. The exact same bird she had noticed in one of the photographs from the attic. Her heart hammered. This was it. The secret. The reason Eleanor had written the letter. The reason the cottage had remained untouched all these years. With trembling hands, Emma pulled the box toward her. The wood groaned softly. The rope securing it crumbled at her touch. Slowly, carefully, she lifted the lid, and what she saw inside made the blood drain from her face, because lying on top of a stack of documents was a photograph of a little girl, no older than 7, the same girl from the attic pictures, the same girl Eleanor had written about. But that wasn't what shocked Emma. What shocked her was the note attached beneath the photograph. 5 words written in fading ink. She is still alive. Emma stared at the message, unable to breathe, unable to think. Outside, lightning illuminated the cottage. Thunder shook the island. And deep beneath the floorboards, Emma realized that the 70-year-old mystery was far bigger than she had imagined. Because if the missing girl had survived, then someone had lied. For generations, and the truth was only beginning to surface. For a long moment, Emma couldn't move. She remained crouched inside the narrow crawlspace, staring at the faded photograph in her hands. She is still alive. The words echoed through her mind. Impossible. The photograph looked at least 70 years old. The little girl would be in her 80s now if she had survived. Yet, whoever had written that note had sounded certain. Not hopeful. Certain. Emma carefully lifted the photograph. Beneath it lay a bundle of papers wrapped in cloth. And underneath those papers, a journal. Unlike the letters she'd found in the attic, this journal appeared heavily used. Its leather cover was cracked. The edges of the pages were worn. Someone had read it many times, or perhaps written in it over many years. Emma swallowed hard and opened it. The first page contained only a name, Lucy Carter. Her breath caught. A Carter. The same surname. The same family name. The same name that appeared in Eleanor's letters. A strange pressure built inside her chest. She turned the page. The entries began in 1956. The handwriting was neat at first. The writing of a young woman trying to document events carefully. May 12th, 1956. They told everyone she drowned. The ferry captain repeated the story. The sheriff signed the report. The newspapers printed it. But none of it was true. Emma's eyes widened. She turned another page. May 18th, 1956. She's safe for now. Only 4 of us know where she is. If they find her, everything falls apart. We cannot let that happen. The storm outside intensified. Rain pounded against the cottage above. Emma barely noticed. Page after page revealed fragments of a story that had never been told. A little girl. A powerful family. Secrets that someone had desperately tried to keep hidden. The more Emma read, the more unsettling the journal became. Entire sections had been torn out. Several pages were stained with water. Others appeared deliberately scratched over, as though someone had tried to erase the truth. Yet enough remained. Enough to paint a terrifying picture. The missing child had never vanished. She had been hidden, protected, moved from place to place, and the cottage on Blackthorn Island had somehow become part of that protection. Emma continued reading. Hours seemed to disappear. Then she reached an entry that made her freeze. August 3rd, 1956. The girl keeps asking about her mother. I don't know what to tell her. The truth would destroy her. The lie might destroy her too. Emma felt a chill. The journal wasn't describing a mystery anymore. It was describing real people. Real suffering. A real child whose life had been stolen. She turned another page, then another, and suddenly a folded piece of paper slipped free and landed in her lap. A map. Bold. Yellowed. Hand-drawn. Emma unfolded it carefully. It showed Blackthorn Island. Not the modern island. The island as it existed decades earlier. Several locations had been marked in red ink. The cottage, the cliffs, the abandoned lighthouse on the northern shore, and one final location, a circle deep within the forest. Next to it were 3 words. The second house. Emma frowned. She had explored part of the island already. There was no second house, at least none she had seen. A knot tightened in her stomach. Maybe there had once been another building. Maybe it no longer existed. Or maybe it had simply never been found. A sudden gust of wind rattled the entire cottage. The lantern flickered. Emma glanced nervously toward the crawlspace entrance. Darkness stretched around her. For the first time since arriving on Blackthorn Island, she felt genuinely uneasy. Not because of ghosts, not because of legends. Because someone had hidden all of this deliberately. And people usually buried secrets for a reason. Eventually, she climbed back into the living room. The storm was now raging. Lightning flashed beyond the windows. Thunder shook the walls. Emma spread the journal, map, and documents across the floor near the fireplace. The cottage seemed different now, smaller somehow, as though every wall contained another unanswered question. She studied the map again. The red circle in the forest. The second house. What was it? A shelter. A hiding place. A prison. The journal offered no explanation, only scattered references. She's safer there. No one goes near it anymore. The forest protects what remains. Emma read the lines repeatedly. Each time they sounded more mysterious, more troubling. Then she noticed something else. Something she had missed before. Near the back of the journal, tucked between 2 pages, was an old newspaper clipping. The headline immediately caught her attention. Local businessman dies in boating accident. The article was dated September 1956. Emma read quickly. A wealthy property owner had disappeared during a storm. His body was never recovered. Most of the article seemed ordinary. Until she reached the final paragraph, her pulse quickened. The man's name was crossed out with black ink, violently, repeatedly, as if someone had wanted to erase it forever. But one portion remained visible, just enough to read the surname. A Carter. Emma's heart nearly stopped. The room suddenly felt colder. She looked at the photograph, the journal, the map, then at the surname. Carter. Again, and again, and again. The mystery wasn't merely connected to her family. Her family was the mystery. Outside, lightning illuminated the windows. For an instant, the entire room glowed white. And in that flash, Emma thought she saw something. A figure, standing near the edge of the tree line beyond the cottage. Watching. She shot to her feet. The image vanished. Darkness returned. Emma rushed to the window. Nothing. Only rain. Only wind. Only swaying pine trees. Yet her heartbeat refused to slow. Because deep down she knew one thing. The journal had revealed the past. But someone or something on Blackthorn Island still cared about keeping those secrets hidden. And if the map was telling the truth, the answers she needed weren't in the cottage anymore. They were waiting somewhere in the forest, at a place called the second house. and Emma had a feeling that finding it would change everything. Emma barely slept that night. The journal remained open on the kitchen table. The map lay beside it, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same thing. The red circle, the second house, the hidden place deep within the forest, the place Lucy Carter had apparently been taken, the place Eleanor had mentioned without ever fully explaining. By sunrise, Emma had made up her mind. She was going to find it. The storm had passed. A blanket of fog drifted between the trees as she stepped outside carrying a backpack, a flashlight, and the old map folded carefully inside her jacket. The island felt different this morning. Quieter. Watching, the sea rolled gently against the cliffs below. Somewhere overhead, gulls cried through the mist. Emma followed the map northward. At first, the trail was easy to follow. An old footpath wound through dense pines behind the cottage. Grass and moss had nearly swallowed it, but traces remained. The deeper she walked, the older the forest seemed. Towering trees blocked much of the sunlight. The air smelled of wet earth and cedar. Branches twisted overhead like ancient fingers. Several times Emma checked the map. Each time she confirmed she was moving in the right direction. Toward the red circle, toward the mystery that had survived 70 years. Nearly an hour later, she found the first sign, a wooden post, half-rotted, leaning sideways. Most of the paint had disappeared, but one faded symbol remained visible, a bird with outstretched wings. The same bird carved onto the box beneath the cottage. Emma's pulse quickened. She wasn't imagining it. Someone had marked this path. Someone had wanted certain people to find it. The trail narrowed. The forest thickened. Then she saw something ahead. A stone wall. At first, it appeared to be nothing more than a pile of collapsed rocks. But as she approached, its shape became clearer. The remains of a foundation. Old, very old. Trees had grown through portions of it. Roots wrapped around the stones. Nature had spent decades reclaiming whatever once stood here. Emma unfolded the map again. The location matched perfectly. This was it. The second house. Or, at least what remained of it. Disappointment washed over her. She had imagined a hidden cabin, a forgotten shelter, some dramatic revelation waiting behind a door. Instead, there were only ruins, broken stone, rotting timber, silence. Then she noticed the cellar door, half hidden beneath ivy, almost invisible from a distance. Her heart skipped. The heavy wooden doors lay flat against the ground, weathered, darkened by age, yet somehow still intact. Emma knelt and brushed away years of dirt and leaves. Iron handles emerged. Rust covered them. But they moved, slowly, painfully, with a groan that echoed through the forest. The doors opened. Cold air drifted upward, air untouched by sunlight. Emma aimed her flashlight downward. Stone steps disappeared into darkness, a darkness that seemed far deeper than it should have been. For a moment she hesitated. Every instinct told her to turn around, to walk away, to leave old secrets buried. Instead, she switched on her flashlight and descended. The underground room was larger than she expected. The ceiling arched overhead. Stone walls surrounded her. Dust coated every surface. Yet, unlike the ruins above, this place felt preserved, protected, almost frozen in time. Emma slowly swept the flashlight around the room and froze. Furniture, a bed, a small table, shelves, books, a rocking chair. It wasn't a cellar. It was a home. Someone had lived here. For months, maybe years. The realization sent chills across her skin. Lucy hadn't merely been hidden, she had been kept here. Emma moved carefully through the room. Everything appeared untouched, as if the occupant had stepped away and never returned. A child's blanket remained folded on the bed. A cup still sat on the table. Several books rested neatly on a shelf. Waiting. Always waiting. Then her flashlight landed on the far wall. Photographs. Dozens of them. Pinned carefully in rows. Emma's breath caught. Every photograph showed the same little girl, Lucy. Growing older, one picture showed her around 7 years old. Another perhaps 10. Another 14. Then 18. 20. 25. Emma stared in disbelief. The photographs continued for years. Decades. Someone had documented Lucy's life long after her disappearance. Long after the world believed she was dead. The final photograph looked relatively recent, perhaps 20 years old. An elderly woman stood beside the ocean, silver hair blowing in the wind. But the eyes remained unmistakable. Lucy? Alive. Or at least alive far longer than anyone had known. Emma stepped backward. Her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. The journal had been true. Every word. The missing girl survived. For decades. Maybe longer. But why? Why hide her? Why fake her death? What could possibly justify such a secret? Then she saw another object resting on the table. A small wooden box. Unlike everything else in the room, it appeared untouched by dust, as though someone had placed it there much more recently. Emma approached slowly. Her pulse hammered. A note rested on top. Only one sentence was written across it. "If you're Emma Carter, you've finally found us." The world seemed to stop. Emma stared at the words. Read them once. Then twice. Then again. Her name. Not her family name. Not a descendant. Not a Carter. Emma Carter. Specifically, someone had known she would come. Someone had expected her. The same way Eleanor's letter had expected her. The same way the cottage had seemed to wait for her arrival. A sudden chill swept through the underground room. Not from fear. From realization. This wasn't about a mystery from 70 years ago anymore. This was about her. And whatever waited inside that wooden box was about to explain why. Emma reached forward, her fingers trembling, and slowly lifted the lid. Emma stared at the contents of the box for a very long time. The underground room had grown silent again. No wind, no creaking wood, no distant cries of seabirds. Only the sound of her own breathing. Inside the box were dozens of letters. Some were tied together with ribbon. Others were stacked neatly in bundles. There were journals, photographs, handwritten notes, and at the very bottom, a single envelope addressed directly to her, Emma Carter. Not to the one who finds this, not to a future descendant. Her name. Her exact name, as though someone had known she would stand here one day, as though someone had been waiting. Slowly, she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in careful handwriting. The signature at the bottom made her heart stop. Lucy Carter, the missing girl. The girl who had supposedly died 70 years ago. The girl whose life had become a mystery. The girl whose photographs covered the walls around her. She had written this. For Emma. Emma sat on the edge of the narrow bed and began to read. The letter wasn't filled with shocking revelations. No hidden treasure. No dramatic confession. Instead, it told a story. A story about survival. About loneliness. About finding reasons to keep going when the world had forgotten your name. Lucy wrote about growing up in hiding, about watching fairies come and go from a distance, about wondering what kind of life she might have lived if things had been different. Most of all, she wrote about something Emma understood all too well: loss. The loss of family. The loss of belonging. The loss of feeling seen. One passage struck Emma harder than all the others. The hardest part was never being hidden. The hardest part was believing no one would ever come after me. That no one would remember. That no one would care. Then I realized something. Being remembered isn't what saves us. Helping someone else feel less alone does. Emma lowered the letter. Tears blurred her vision. For years she had carried her grief like a secret weight. After her parents died, she learned not to expect comfort. After moving from one foster home to another, she learned not to become attached. After Evelyn died, she learned how empty the world could feel. She had spent so much of her life surviving that she had forgotten what it meant to live. And somehow, this woman she'd never met understood that perfectly. Over the following days, Emma returned repeatedly to the underground room. She read every journal, every letter, every note left behind by Lucy. The deeper she explored, the more she realized something remarkable. The second house had never been only a hiding place. It had become a refuge. Over the years, others had come here. Women escaping dangerous situations. Young people with nowhere else to go. Widows carrying unbearable grief. People who arrived broken and left stronger. Each had left behind a page, a photograph, a memory, a piece of themselves. The room wasn't preserving secrets. It was preserving healing. And suddenly, Emma understood why the cottage had felt different from the moment she arrived. It wasn't waiting to reveal the past. It was waiting to continue its purpose. Weeks passed. Spring slowly gave way to summer. The fog appeared less often. Wildflowers emerged along the cliffs. The cottage no longer felt abandoned. It felt alive. Emma repaired broken windows, painted walls, fixed loose floorboards. But something else was changing too. Something inside her. For the first time in years, she stopped counting what she had lost. Instead, she started noticing what remained. The sunrise over the ocean. The warmth of tea on cold mornings. The sound of rain on the roof. The quiet comfort of belonging somewhere, even if that place was a forgotten island. One afternoon, while organizing Lucy's journals, Emma discovered a list. A simple collection of names, dozens of them. Beside each name was a short note. Some were only a sentence. Others were several paragraphs. But the message was always the same. Each person had arrived carrying pain. And each had eventually found a reason to keep moving forward. Emma read the list late into the night. By the final page, tears streamed down her face, because for the first time in her life, she realized she wasn't unique in her loneliness. There were countless others who felt abandoned, forgotten, invisible, just like she had. And maybe that realization was its own kind of healing. By midsummer, Emma made a decision. She stopped thinking of Blackthorn Island as an escape. She stopped thinking of the cottage as a project. She stopped thinking of herself as someone waiting for life to begin. Instead, she began opening the doors. Not publicly, not with advertisements, not with signs. Simply by being available. By keeping a light in the window, by maintaining the old traditions Lucy had described, a place where someone could rest, a place where someone could breathe, a place where someone could remember who they were. One evening, as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Emma stood on the porch watching the waves below. The ocean glowed gold. The wind moved gently through the pines. For the first time in years, she felt something unexpected. Peace. Not because every question had been answered, not because every wound had healed, but because she had finally stopped running from herself. The orphaned girl who arrived on Blackthorn Island carrying nothing but grief was gone. In her place stood someone different, someone stronger. Not because life had become easier, but because she had found purpose inside her pain, and somewhere deep in her heart, Emma knew that was exactly what Lucy had hoped for. The cottage had survived 70 years. The secret had survived 70 years. Now it was Emma's turn to carry the story forward, not as its owner, not as its guardian, but as its next chapter. Autumn arrived quietly on Blackthorn Island. The summer visitors were gone. The sea grew darker. The wind carried a sharper edge, and yet the cottage had never felt warmer. Emma stood by the kitchen window one October morning, watching fog drift across the cliffs while a kettle whistled softly behind her. A year ago, she would have barely recognized the woman staring back from the reflection in the glass. Back then, she had arrived carrying little more than grief. Now, she carried something entirely different. Purpose. The change hadn't happened all at once. There had been no miracle, no single moment when everything suddenly made sense. Instead, it had happened the way the island changed with the seasons. Slowly, quietly, almost unnoticed, until one day she looked around and realized everything was different. Including herself, the cottage had become known in ways no one could fully explain. There was no website, no advertisement, no sign at the ferry dock. Yet, somehow people found it. A friend told a friend. A letter passed from one person to another. A whispered recommendation during difficult times. Sometimes months would pass without a visitor. Sometimes 3 people would arrive in the same week, each carrying a different story, each carrying a different kind of pain. Emma never asked for explanations. She had learned that people shared their stories when they were ready, not before. And often, the most important healing happened in the spaces between words. Over tea, over long walks along the shoreline, over quiet evenings listening to waves crash against distant rocks. One snowy afternoon, a woman arrived carrying nothing but a backpack and a worn photograph. She stayed for 10 days. Most of that time she spent sitting near the fireplace, staring into the flames. When she finally left, she hugged Emma tightly. Neither woman said much. There was no need. A few months later, a letter arrived. "Thank you for reminding me that surviving and living are not the same thing." Emma folded the letter carefully and placed it inside one of Lucy's old journals. Another story added to the collection, another life continuing forward. By winter, an entire shelf in the living room was filled with notes left behind by visitors. Some were only a few sentences. Others filled entire pages. Emma occasionally read them on stormy nights, not because she was searching for answers, but because each one reminded her why the cottage mattered. One note simply read, "I thought I was broken. It turns out I was only tired." Another said, "This was the first place where nobody asked me to pretend I was okay." And one, written in shaky handwriting, brought tears to Emma's eyes every time she read it. "Thank you for leaving the light on." The light. That became a tradition. Every evening at sunset, Emma lit a lantern and placed it in the front window. The same way Lucy had once done, the same way Eleanor had done before her. A simple signal. Nothing more. Yet somehow it meant everything. It told the world that someone was there, that someone would open the door, that someone understood. For people who had spent years feeling invisible, that small promise mattered more than Emma could have imagined. One evening, as winter gave way to spring once again, Emma climbed the hill behind the cottage. The sky glowed orange above the ocean. The waves shimmered beneath the fading sunlight. From there, she could see the entire island. The forest, the cliffs, the winding paths, the small cottage standing proudly against the shoreline. For a moment, she thought about the day she first arrived. The frightened orphan who stepped off the ferry with a single duffel bag. The young woman who believed she had nowhere left to belong. How different everything seemed now. And yet, the greatest discovery hadn't been the hidden room, or Lucy's journals, or the 70-year-old secret. The greatest discovery had been herself. She finally understood something Lucy had been trying to say all along. Healing wasn't about forgetting what hurt. It wasn't about erasing scars. It wasn't about pretending the past never happened. Healing was learning that pain could exist beside hope. That loss could exist beside love. The broken things could still be beautiful. The cottage had taught her that. The island had taught her that. The people who passed through its doors had taught her that. And now it was her turn to pass that lesson forward. A few weeks later, a ferry arrived just before sunset. Emma happened to be working in the garden when she noticed a young girl standing alone near the dock. Maybe 19, maybe 20. The girl carried an old suitcase and looked terrified. She kept glancing around as though she wasn't entirely sure she should be there. Emma recognized that look immediately. She had worn it herself once. The look of someone who had run out of places to go. The look of someone hoping to find a reason to keep moving forward. Slowly, Emma walked down the path. The girl looked up. Their eyes met. Neither spoke at first. The ocean rolled quietly behind them. The wind moved through the pines. And then Emma smiled. The same gentle smile someone had once offered her when she needed it most. "Are you looking for the cottage?" she asked. The girl nodded. Tears immediately filled her eyes. Emma didn't ask why she had come. She didn't ask what had happened. She simply reached for the suitcase, turned toward home, and said the words that had become part of the island itself. "Come on. You're safe here." As evening settled over Blackthorn Island, the lantern glowed warmly in the cottage window. Its light stretched across the darkness, across the cliffs, across the sea, a beacon for anyone who needed it. And inside, Emma Carter finally understood the truth. The cottage had never been waiting for a secret to be uncovered. It had been waiting for someone willing to keep its purpose alive, someone willing to become the light. And after all these years, that someone was her. Emma Carter came to Blackthorn Island believing she was completely alone, an orphan with no family, no place to belong, and no idea what came next. What she found inside the abandoned cottage was more than a 70-year-old secret. She found a story of survival, a legacy of kindness, and proof that even the deepest wounds can heal when someone leaves the door open. The hidden journals, the forgotten letters, and the mystery of Lucy Carter all led Emma to one simple truth. No one is meant to carry their pain alone. Over time, the frightened young woman who arrived with nothing but grief became something she never expected.